There are moments in history when evil wears a charming smile, when danger disguises itself in intelligence and charisma, when a monster walks among us looking like everyone else. This is the story of Theodore Robert Bundy, known simply as Ted Bundy, one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. His crimes shocked the nation, changed how we understand criminal psychology, and left a trail of devastation that continues to echo through the lives of victims' families today. Before we dive deeper into this dark chapter of American crime, I want to connect with you. Where are you watching this from? Leave a like if you're interested in understanding how criminal minds work and why we must never forget these victims. Your engagement helps us share these important stories. Theodore Robert Bundy was born on November 24, 1946 in Burlington, Vermont. Between 1974 and 1978, he kidnapped, raped, and murdered dozens of young women and girls across multiple states, including Washington, Oregon, Utah, Idaho, Colorado, and Florida. He confessed to at least 30 murders, though experts believe the actual number could exceed 100. What made Bundy particularly terrifying was not just the brutality of his crimes, but the mask he wore. He was a law student, a political activist, intelligent, articulate, and conventionally attractive. He used these qualities as weapons, manipulating trust to prey upon innocent victims. His reign of terror ended with his execution in the electric chair on January 24, 1989, at Florida State Prison in Rayford. His case fundamentally changed how law enforcement profiles serial killers and sparked countless books, films, and documentaries examining psychopathy and the failures that allowed him to continue killing for so long. Understanding evil requires examining its origins, not to excuse it, but to recognize warning signs and protect future victims. Bundy was born Theodore Robert Cowell to Eleanor Louise Cowell, an unmarried 22-year-old woman. In the 1940s, single motherhood carried severe social stigma, so his family created an elaborate deception. They raised him as his mother's younger brother, with his maternal grandparents, Samuel and Eleanor Cowell, pretending to be his parents. His biological father's identity remains unknown, with speculation ranging from Lloyd Marshall to Jack Worthington, though later DNA testing ruled out some theories. The family initially lived in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, until Bundy was 3 years old. Even during these early years, disturbing behavioral patterns emerged that should have raised alarm bells. He tortured animals, including hanging and burning a cat. He terrorized other children in the woods. He built punji traps, primitive weapons designed to injure. Most chillingly, he attacked a neighbor with an axe. These were not childish pranks or accidents. They were early manifestations of violent tendencies that would later escalate into serial murder. In 1951, his mother changed her surname to Nelson and relocated to Tacoma, Washington, attempting a fresh start. She married Johnny Culpepper Bundy, an army cook who legally adopted young Ted. On the surface, his childhood appeared normal. They lived in a middle-class neighborhood. He attended school. He participated in community activities. But beneath this veneer of normalcy, darkness festered. Bundy was profoundly lonely. He suffered bullying at school. He developed voyeuristic behaviors, frequently spying on women undressing through their windows at night, often while intoxicated. He described himself as isolated, incapable of forming genuine friendships or emotional connections. His grandfather Samuel's influence proved particularly toxic. The man had violent rages, exhibited racism, and created an atmosphere of fear and instability. Young Ted observed and internalized these behaviors. During adolescence, Bundy converted to Mormonism, perhaps seeking structure or belonging, but he eventually abandoned the faith. The religion could not fill the void where empathy and human connection should have developed. Bundy graduated from Woodrow Wilson High School in 1965. Despite his inner turmoil, he managed to appear popular, though his social success masked deep-seated insecurities and growing darkness. He briefly attended the University of Puget Sound from 1965 to 1966 before transferring to the University of Washington to study Chinese. However, he dropped out in 1968 following a devastating romantic rejection. His relationship with Diane Edwards became a defining psychological wound. When she publicly humiliated him and ended their relationship, something inside Bundy fractured further. This rejection would haunt him and influence his choice of victims. Later, almost all his victims shared physical characteristics with Edwards. Young white women with long, dark hair parted in the middle. He was not just killing random strangers. He was symbolically murdering the woman who rejected him over and over again. During this period of drift, Bundy worked various menial jobs, including dishwasher positions, while volunteering for Republican political campaigns. In 1968, he worked for Senator Peter McCloskey's campaign, demonstrating his ability to present a respectable facade while harboring murderous thoughts. In 1970, he returned to the University of Washington, this time studying psychology. The irony was not lost on investigators later. A serial killer studying the human mind, learning the language of mental health professionals, understanding how to manipulate psychological assessments. He graduated with honors in 1972, proving his intelligence was genuine, even if his humanity was not. During this period, he worked at a suicide prevention hotline in Seattle, where he met two women who would later play significant roles in his story. Anne Rule, a co-worker, would eventually write The Stranger Beside Me, one of the most insightful books about Bundy. Elizabeth Klopfer, who later used the name Liz Kendall, became his long-term girlfriend. She grew increasingly suspicious of his nocturnal activities, his strange hours, his unaccounted absences. Her instincts were correct, but like many people close to charming psychopaths, she struggled to reconcile the man she thought she knew with the monster he truly was. Bundy was accepted to two law schools, the University of Puget Sound and the University of Utah. He briefly attended the University of Puget Sound in 1973 before moving to Utah, where he continued legal studies while working as an assistant in the Utah Department of Emergency Services. His intelligence and charisma made him a convincing speaker and promising law student. Professors and colleagues saw potential. They saw ambition. They did not see the predator preparing to unleash unprecedented violence. He abandoned his studies in 1974, the same year his killing spree escalated from possibility to certainty. Bundy's criminal activities likely began in 1973, influenced by his consumption of violent pornography, but they exploded into a full-scale murder spree in 1974. He is confirmed to have killed at least 20 women, confessed to 30, and is suspected in 36 or more deaths. Every single victim was a young woman or girl, ranging from 12 to 25 years old. Most were white, most had long dark hair parted in the middle, and many were college students just beginning their adult lives with dreams and ambitions that would never be realized. The year 1974 in Washington state became a nightmare. Karen Sparks, 18 years old, survived his attack but suffered permanent brain damage. Her life was forever altered by Bundy's violence. Linda Ann Healy, 21, was kidnapped directly from her bedroom, her blood-soaked bedding the only evidence of the horror that occurred. Donna Gail Manson, 19 years old, vanished. Susan Elaine Rancourt, 18. Roberta Kathleen Parks, 22. Brenda Carol Ball, 22. Jorgen Hawkins, 18. Each name represents not just a statistic, but a human being with family, friends, and futures stolen by Bundy's depravity. On July 14, 1974, Bundy committed one of his boldest attacks at Lake Sammamish State Park. In broad daylight, surrounded by witnesses, he approached women while wearing a fake arm cast, introducing himself as Ted and asking for help loading a sailboat onto his car. His charming demeanor and apparent vulnerability disarmed suspicion. That day, Janice Ann Ott, 23, and Denise Marie Naslund, 19, both disappeared. Multiple witnesses provided descriptions and even a name, yet Bundy evaded capture. Between 1974 and 1975, his hunting grounds expanded to Utah, Idaho, and Colorado. Nancy Wilcox, 16 years old, Melissa Ann Smith, 17, Laura Ann Amy, 17. These teenagers had their entire lives ahead of them. Carol DeRonch, 18, became one of the few survivors who could identify Bundy. Her testimony would later prove crucial in his conviction. Deborah Jean Kent, 17, disappeared from a high school play. Corinne Eileen Campbell, 23, vanished from a ski resort. Julie Lyle Cunningham, 26, Denise Lynn Oliverson, 24, Lynette Dawn Culver, 12 years old, Susan Curtis, 15. The youngest victims are especially heartbreaking. Children who never had the chance to experience adulthood. After escaping custody twice, Bundy fled to Florida in late 1977. On January 15, 1978, he launched his most brazen and horrific attack. He broke into the Chi Omega sorority house at Florida State University in the early morning hours. In a frenzy of violence, he attacked 5 women as they slept, murdering Margaret Elizabeth Bowman, 21, and Lisa Janet Levy, 20. He severely injured Kathy Kleiner, 21, Karen Chandler, 21, and Cheryl Thomas, 21. The survivors lived, but they carry physical and psychological scars to this day. His final confirmed victim was Kimberly Diane Leach, 12 years old, whom he kidnapped, raped, and strangled. Her body was found weeks later in an abandoned pig farm. Unconfirmed victims potentially date back to 1961, when 8-year-old Anne-Marie Burr disappeared from her home. Bundy lived nearby and was 14 years old at the time. He denied involvement, but investigators have long suspected him. The true number of his victims may never be known. He traveled extensively in his tan Volkswagen Beetle, committing opportunistic and planned crimes across the country, leaving families without answers and graves without names. Before we continue examining one of the darkest chapters in criminal history, I want to connect with you again. If you're still with us, where are you watching from? This story is difficult to hear, but it's important we remember these victims and learn from these tragedies. Please leave a like to help others find this important content. Understanding how predators operate is the first step in protecting ourselves and our communities. What made Bundy exceptionally dangerous was not merely his willingness to kill, but his sophisticated methodology. He was an organized, methodical predator who studied his victims, planned his attacks, and evolved his techniques. Unlike disorganized killers who act impulsively, Bundy approached murder with calculated precision, making him far more difficult to catch and exponentially more deadly. His primary method of approach involved exploiting human compassion and social conditioning. He frequently wore fake casts on his arm or leg, used crutches, or carried objects that appeared heavy. He would approach young women in public places, college campuses, shopping centers, parks, and ask for help carrying items to his car. Women were socially conditioned to be helpful, to be polite, to not appear rude or suspicious. Bundy weaponized these social expectations. His conventionally attractive appearance, his educated manner of speaking, and his apparent vulnerability created a perfect trap. By the time victims realized the danger, they were already isolated and within his control. In other instances, he impersonated authority figures, claiming to be a police officer or firefighter. He carried fake badges. He spoke with confidence and authority. When someone believes they are interacting with law enforcement, their guard drops completely. This tactic proved devastatingly effective. Once victims were close to his vehicle, usually his tan Volkswagen Beetle, he would strike with sudden violence, using a tire iron or crowbar to incapacitate them. He would handcuff them, force them into his car, and drive to remote locations he had previously scouted. These were not crimes of passion or opportunity alone. They were carefully orchestrated abductions that demonstrated planning, patience, and a chilling understanding of human psychology. What he did to his victims in those remote locations defies comprehension and demonstrates depths of depravity that challenge our understanding of human nature. He raped his victims repeatedly. He strangled them, often manually, watching the life drain from their eyes, exerting the ultimate control. In several cases, he decapitated them using a hacksaw, keeping their severed heads for days afterward, treating them as possessions. He engaged in necrophilia, returning to dump sites multiple times to interact with decomposing remains. He would wash their hair, apply makeup to their faces, and photograph them with a Polaroid camera, creating trophies of his conquests. Bundy deliberately avoided using firearms, understanding they attracted attention and created forensic evidence like ballistics. Instead, he relied on blunt force trauma and strangulation, methods that were silent and personal. He burned his victims' clothing to destroy evidence. He disposed of jewelry and personal items in charity donation bins, scattering evidence across multiple locations. In Florida, his methodology became even more reckless and violent. He attacked the Chi Omega sorority house with a club, striking multiple victims in rapid succession, demonstrating that his psychological deterioration had reached a point where planning gave way to frenzied violence. His own words reveal his motivations and mindset. In interviews, he stated, "The ultimate possession was, in fact, the taking of the life, and then the physical possession of the remains." This was not about sexual gratification alone. It was about total control, about reducing human beings to objects he could possess, manipulate, and destroy. He spoke of murder as ownership, as the final expression of his will over another person. He said, "I was special, and I deserved to have and do whatever I wanted." This statement encapsulates the narcissistic core of his psychology. He genuinely believed he was superior, that normal rules and moral boundaries did not apply to him, that other people existed merely as instruments for his gratification. Despite his careful planning, Bundy's arrogance and compulsion eventually led to mistakes. His first arrest occurred on August 16, 1975, in Salt Lake City, Utah. A highway patrolman attempted to pull him over for a routine traffic stop, but Bundy fled, leading police on a chase through residential neighborhoods. When finally stopped, his behavior was suspicious and evasive. A search of his Volkswagen Beetle revealed items that no innocent person would possess: handcuffs, a ski mask, rope, wire, a crowbar, and an ice pick. These were the tools of abduction and murder, though at the time, police did not yet connect him to the numerous disappearances. Carol DeRonch, one of the few women who escaped Bundy's clutches, identified him in a lineup. She had been approached by a man claiming to be a police officer who said someone had attempted to break into her car. When she followed him, he attempted to handcuff her and force her into his vehicle. She fought back, escaped, and survived to tell her story. Her courage and testimony led to Bundy's conviction for aggravated kidnapping in 1976. He was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison, a sentence that seemed inadequate even then, but it was only the beginning. While incarcerated in Utah, Colorado authorities charged him with the murder of Corinne Eileen Campbell, whose body had been found near a ski resort. He was transferred to Aspen, Colorado for trial. During a court hearing on June 7, 1977, Bundy was allowed to visit the courthouse law library without leg shackles or handcuffs, a privilege granted because he was representing himself. He jumped from a second-story window and escaped into the mountains. For 6 days, he remained free, surviving in the wilderness, breaking into cabins for food and supplies. He was recaptured on June 13th, But this escape demonstrated his resourcefulness and determination. It would not be his last escape. On December 30th, 1977, while imprisoned in Glenwood Springs, Colorado, Bundy executed a far more elaborate plan. Over weeks, he had sawed through a light fixture in his cell ceiling, creating an access point to the crawl space above. He squeezed through the small opening, navigated through the ceiling, and eventually found his way to a jailer's apartment within the prison complex. He changed into civilian clothes, walked out the front door, and vanished. This time, he remained free much longer, using the time to travel across the country to Florida, where he would commit his final, most brutal attacks. His final arrest came on February 15, 1978, in Pensacola, Florida. A police officer noticed a Volkswagen Beetle being driven erratically and ran the license plates, discovering it was stolen. When the officer approached, Bundy initially complied, then suddenly attacked, attempting to flee. After a physical struggle, he was subdued and arrested. At the home he had been renting, investigators found damning evidence, including items belonging to Kimberly Leach, his final victim, whose remains would be discovered weeks later. Bundy's trials became media spectacles, among the first to be televised nationally, transforming courtroom proceedings into macabre entertainment. He insisted on representing himself for much of the proceedings, sabotaging his own defense attorneys, creating delays, and attempting to manipulate the legal process. His legal knowledge was sufficient to understand procedure, but not sufficient to mount an effective defense, especially against overwhelming physical evidence and witness testimony. His Utah trial in 1976 resulted in conviction for aggravated kidnapping based on Carol DeRonch's testimony and the physical evidence found in his vehicle. The 1 to 15-year sentence was handed down, but Colorado's murder charges meant his legal troubles were far from over. His escapes and subsequent crimes in Florida led to 2 separate high-profile trials. The first Florida trial took place in Miami in June and July of 1979, focusing on the Chi Omega sorority house attacks. The evidence against him was extensive and damning. Survivors testified about the horrific attack. Forensic odontologists presented bite mark evidence found on Lisa Levy's body, matching Bundy's distinctive dental impressions. This bite mark evidence was particularly compelling, as Bundy's teeth had unusual characteristics that created a unique pattern. Eyewitnesses placed him near the sorority house at the time of the attacks. Despite his attempts to create reasonable doubt through cross-examination and theatrics, the jury deliberated for less than 7 hours before returning guilty verdicts on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of burglary. In July 1979, Judge Edward Cowart sentenced him to death by electrocution twice. During sentencing, Judge Cowart made a statement that captured the tragedy of Bundy's wasted potential. "It is ordered that you be put to death by a current of electricity, that current be continued until you are dead. Take care of yourself, young man. I say that to you sincerely. It is a tragedy for this court to see such a total waste of humanity that I have experienced in this courtroom. You are a bright young man. You would have made a good lawyer, and I would have loved to have you practice in front of me. But you went another way, partner. Take care of yourself." The second Florida trial occurred in Orlando in January and February of 1980, addressing the kidnapping, rape, and murder of 12-year-old Kimberly Leach. This trial was even more emotionally devastating, as it involved a child victim. Evidence included fibers from Bundy's clothing found on Kimberly's body, eyewitness testimony placing him near her school on the day of her disappearance, and forensic evidence linking him to the van where she was murdered. The jury convicted him, and in February 1980, he received his 3rd death sentence. During his trial, Bundy proposed marriage to Carol Ann Boone, a former co-worker who had become obsessed with him and believed in his innocence. In a bizarre legal maneuver, he asked her to marry him during her testimony. She accepted, and because Florida law at the time recognized such declarations in front of a judge as legally binding, they were considered married. They had a daughter, Rose Bundy, in 1981, conceived during prison visits through unknown means. Carol eventually realized the truth about her husband and divorced him in 1986, taking their daughter and disappearing from public life to protect her from her father's legacy. As his execution date approached and legal appeals were exhausted, Bundy attempted to bargain for his life by offering confessions and information about unsolved cases. Throughout the 1980s, he granted interviews to journalists, authors, and FBI agents, most notably Stephen Michaud, Hugh Ainsworth, and FBI agent Bill Hagmaier. These interviews provide chilling insights into his psychology, though they must be viewed skeptically, as Bundy was a manipulative liar even when supposedly telling the truth. He confessed to more than 30 murders across 7 states, providing details about locations, methods, and victims that only the killer could know. However, he also lied, withheld information, and provided false details when it suited his purposes. He wanted to extend his life by promising more confessions, more information, more closure for families, always dangling the possibility of revealing more if given more time. In these interviews, Bundy attempted to shift blame for his actions. He claimed violent pornography corrupted him, ignoring the fact that millions of people consume such material without becoming killers. He blamed his absent biological father, his grandfather's abusiveness, and alcohol consumption. While these factors may have contributed to his psychological development, they do not excuse or explain his choices. Many people endure difficult childhoods without becoming serial killers. Bundy made deliberate choices to harm others again and again for years. He was not a victim of circumstance. He was a predator who chose violence and control over empathy and humanity. He spoke about his crimes in the third person, creating psychological distance, saying things like, "The individual would do this," rather than, "I did this." This linguistic trick allowed him to discuss his murders while maintaining emotional detachment. He estimated 36 victims, but hinted at more, suggesting investigators should add a digit to 36, implying over 300 victims, though this was likely another manipulation, an attempt to inflate his importance and notoriety. Despite his attempts to portray himself as someone who lost control or was driven by external forces, his own words contradicted this narrative. He described planning his crimes, scouting locations, studying potential victims. He described the pleasure he derived from control and possession. He admitted to necrophilia, to keeping remains, to revisiting bodies. These are not the actions of someone who lost control. These are the actions of someone who reveled in control, who found satisfaction in the suffering and death of others. After nearly 10 years on death row, exhausting every possible appeal and legal maneuver, Theodore Robert Bundy's execution was scheduled for January 24, 1989. In his final days, he granted multiple interviews, hoping to delay the inevitable. He met with his mother, spoke with religious counselors, and made final confessions to FBI agents, still attempting to manipulate circumstances even as time ran out. On the morning of his execution, Bundy was given a last meal of his choice, though reports indicate he refused it. He smoked a final cigarette. He made a final phone call to his mother, reportedly telling her he was sorry. His last words, spoken to prison officials Jim Coleman and Fred Lawrence, were, "Jim and Fred, I would like you to give my love to my family and friends." There was no apology to his victims' families, no acknowledgement of the pain and suffering he caused, no genuine remorse. Even at the very end, Bundy remained focused on himself. At 7:16 a.m., 2,000 volts of electricity surged through his body as he sat strapped in the electric chair at Florida State Prison. Due to a poorly placed wet sponge meant to improve electrical conductivity, his head briefly caught fire during the execution, adding a grotesque final chapter to his grotesque life. Outside the prison, crowds had gathered, some holding signs that read, "Roast in peace," and "Tuesday is Friday." A local radio DJ played the sound of bacon frying, a macabre celebration that reflected public anger and the desire for justice, even if that celebration felt uncomfortable and problematic to many observers. His body was cremated, and his ashes were scattered in the Cascade Mountains of Washington state, near where many of his victims had died. There would be no grave marker, no memorial, no place for anyone to glorify or commemorate his existence. Even in death, society attempted to erase him, to deny him the notoriety he craved. Ted Bundy's impact extends far beyond his victims and their families, though their suffering must always remain central to any discussion of his crimes. His case fundamentally changed how law enforcement approaches serial murder investigations. He scored 39 out of 40 on the Hare psychopathy checklist, making him a textbook example of antisocial personality disorder and psychopathy. His ability to appear normal, even charming, while harboring such darkness, challenged assumptions about what evil looks like. The FBI used his case to develop more sophisticated criminal profiling techniques. His crimes highlighted the importance of multi-jurisdictional cooperation, as his murders across state lines initially prevented investigators from recognizing patterns. The delay in connecting murders in Washington, Utah, Colorado, and Florida allowed him to continue killing far longer than should have been possible. His case demonstrated that monsters do not always look like monsters, that intelligence and education do not preclude evil, and that charm can be a weapon as deadly as any knife or gun. His case inspired numerous cultural works, though many of these glamorize or romanticize him in troubling ways. And Rules, The Stranger Beside Me, published in 1980, remains one of the most insightful examinations of Bundy, written by someone who knew him personally and struggled to reconcile the co-worker she liked with the killer he was. The film, Extremely Wicked, Shockingly Evil and Vile, released in 2019, starring Zac Efron, attempted to show how Bundy appeared to others, though it faced criticism for making him too sympathetic or attractive. The documentary series Ted Bundy Falling for a Killer, released in 2020, focused more appropriately on the victims and survivors, centering their stories rather than his. Debates continue about unresolved cases and potential victims. Investigators have used DNA technology to test evidence from cold cases, sometimes confirming and sometimes ruling out Bundy's involvement. His DNA has been analyzed in connection with dozens of unsolved murders from the 1960s and 70s. Some connections have been definitively ruled out, while others remain possibilities. The true number of his victims may never be known with certainty. His manipulative charm continues to fascinate and disturb people, spawning discussions about true crime ethics, the glamorization of killers, and the responsibility of media in telling these stories. There is a fine line between educating people about criminal psychology and turning murderers into celebrities. Bundy would have loved the attention, the books, the movies, the endless discussions about him. He craved notoriety and importance. In death, he achieved a form of immortality he could never have earned through legitimate means. But we must resist the temptation to focus on him at the expense of those he destroyed. When we say his name, we must also say theirs. Linda Ann Healy, Donna Gail Manson, Susan Elaine Rancourt, Roberta Kathleen Parks, Brenda Carroll Ball, Jorgan Hawkins, Janice Ann Ott, Denise Marie Nasland, Nancy Wilcox, Melissa Ann Smith, Laura Ann Aim, Deborah Jean Kent, Karen Eileen Campbell, Julie Lyle Cunningham, Denise Lynn Oliverson, Lynette Dawn Culver, Susan Curtis, Margaret Elizabeth Bowman, Lisa Janet Levy, and Kimberly Diane Leach. These names matter. These lives mattered. They had dreams, families, friends, and futures that were stolen. They deserve to be remembered not as statistics or Bundy's victims, but as individuals whose lives had value and meaning beyond the manner of their deaths. The lesson of Ted Bundy is not about him. It is about recognizing that evil exists, that it can wear a friendly face, and that we must remain vigilant. It is about believing survivors, supporting victims' families, and demanding better from our criminal justice systems. It is about teaching young people, especially young women, that politeness should never override personal safety, that saying no is acceptable, that trusting your instincts can save your life. It is about ensuring that multi-jurisdictional investigations share information efficiently so patterns are recognized quickly. It is about understanding that psychopaths exist among us, and education, intelligence, and charm do not preclude capacity for evil. Most importantly, it is about never forgetting that behind every crime statistic is a human life, a person who loved and was loved, whose absence leaves a permanent void. Ted Bundy deserves to be remembered as what he was, a coward who preyed on vulnerable people, a narcissist who destroyed lives to satisfy his ego, and a killer whose evil should serve as a permanent warning about the darkness that can hide behind a charming smile. His victims deserve to be remembered for who they were, not how they died. That is the only legacy that truly matters.